Welcome to the Forum for Expatriate Management's 2020 Asia Pacific Online Summit. Proudly supported by our sponsors: Air Inc., Alto Vita, HSBC, and Removal Management Worldwide. Global mobility and HR professionals, welcome to the Forum for Expatriate Management's 2020 Asia Pacific Online Summit. Please welcome FEM's Global Director of Content and Events and your Summit Chair, Claire Tennant-Skull.
Warm welcome back to FEM's 2020 APAC Online Summit. This is day 2 of the special condensed digital version of our annual get-together. If you were unable to catch day 1 live, don't worry, you can find it on demand on the FEM website. So, quick reminder, on day 1 we heard about the future of talent in the Asia Pacific region from our panellists from Johnson & Johnson, Cargill and the Australian government. We also gained some valuable insight into digital banking solutions and virtual assignments from experts at HSBC and Air Inc. And we got a snapshot of the capabilities that mobility needs now from Emery Castaneda. Today we have another engaging panel discussion to get our mobility minds in gear. We'll be looking at all aspects of relocating in the new normal. We'll follow this with a brilliant mobility masterclass on rebooting your programme and collaborative working from 2 leaders who combine their expertise as HR business partner and head of international assignments. We'll end with an exploration of mobility excellence among individuals, teams and service provider partners as I talk to 3 of our distinguished Emma's judges. These also include Stephen Park, who was, of course, last year's worthy recipient of the Emma for his outstanding contribution to global mobility. So, although we can't celebrate in the usual style, we can at least encourage you to acknowledge your achievements. We'll begin now with our focus panel discussion, and I'm delighted that we have such a wide but complementary range of perspectives on the topic.
Focus panel discussion: Relocating in the new normal. Your speakers are Vivi Kayode, CEO and co-founder at Alto Vita; Emery Castaneda, global mobility expert and leader; Aishagul Kayahan, FEM Australia chapter lead and founding partner at Relocation Specialists; and Jemima Nettleton, director and CEO at Removal Management Worldwide. Moderated by Claire Tennant-Skull, Global Director of Content and Events at FEM.
Hello and welcome to this focus panel discussion on relocating in the new normal. We have a terrific panel for you, but I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a moment. First of all, let's just set the scene. As we all know, the global pandemic has altered almost every aspect of our working and our social lives. And we can no longer take things for granted, least of all mobility. So at the same time, economies, businesses and people can't remain in lockdown forever. We all need to grow and thrive. And so we've got to find a new way of working, of moving around the world and of living. We have to take a clear-eyed look at this. We can't be overly optimistic, of course, but I think we've got to assess the risks and find some sort of balance through the creation of practical solutions. So, though it's an ugly phrase, we've got to find a way through to the new normal. This is where our panel come in. They're here to help because they are already doing this. They've been working on scenario planning, cost containment, employee support, logistical solutions, to name just a few areas. So they're ideally placed to help everyone today with some practical insight, and I will just outline the structure briefly. We're going to look at this in 3 parts. Part 1, we look at where we are now and what we need to do differently. Part 2, we'll have some examples of practical things that we can all do. And then part 3, we'll look at some of the positives and the lessons learned. On to our panel. I'd like you all to introduce yourselves, please. I'm going to go in alphabetical order by surname. So I'm going to start with you, please, Vivi. Hello, Vivi.
Hello, thank you so much, Claire. Very excited to be on this panel. I think it's the first ever female panel I've ever been. My name is Vivi. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Alta-Vita. We assist multinational companies who seek accommodation when relocating their employees with duty of care compliant corporate housing globally, actually, from Singapore, Melbourne, London, all the way to Los Angeles. Our platform is designed collaboratively with mobility professionals as well as assignees to be able to search and book essentially almost instantly in the self-service mode while still remaining compliant to corporate policies. I myself am a product of global mobility, having lived in 8 countries from boarding school in Perth, Australia, to university in Ann Arbor in the US, and then even relocating with fully managed packages from New York to Hong Kong and then to London when I worked in corporate finance for the first 5 years of my career.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. And Emery?
Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm Emery Castañeda. I have almost 10 years experience in corporate global mobility, having practiced in the industries of oil and gas, banking and finance, and currently in manufacturing and consumer goods. I am so happy to be here and sharing with you together with such a distinguished panel.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And Aishagul, you hardly need an introduction.
I'm feeling like the senior in the room, to be honest. So I'm Aishagul Karahan. I've moved at just about every phase in my life, from child to adult. I run a relocation company, or a destination service provider is the new terminology. And I've been running the Australian chapters for the Forum for Expatriate Management since 2012. Nowadays, our chapters are more virtual than face-to-face, but hopefully face-to-face will come back shortly.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. And you're based in Brisbane, aren't you?
I'm based in Brisbane.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, and last but not least, of course, Jemima. Hello, Jemima.
Hi, Claire. Wonderful to be here. My name is Jemima Nettleton, and I'm the CEO of Removal Management Worldwide. We manage the removal process for corporate clients relocating globally. Our point of difference is getting 3 independent quotations from our global panel. So we are relocating people from and to anywhere every single day. Our focus is on very efficient systems, technology-driven, and always remaining a focus to our clients. So service to clients is our number 1 priority. I'm really looking forward to this discussion today. There's been a lot that's changed this year, and I'm really looking forward to sharing my insights in the new normal.
Super. Thank you very much. So part 1, we're looking at where we are now and what we need to do differently. I think we can take it as read that we and the audience all understand that we're just coming out of the COVID crisis, hopefully, and getting back to business. But, as a panel, you're all based in different cities, but operating globally. So I'd like to know what are the particular challenges that you've identified at the moment. And I'd like to come to you first, Aishagul, as our long-standing chapter lead in Australia. You've just begun holding both live and virtual meetings again, and that gives you a pretty accurate overview of things. So I'd just like to get some feedback from you on that.
Okay, so Sydney and Melbourne in fact, they all happened this week. So Brisbane had a face-to-face virtual combined event. Sydney and Melbourne joined together in a rather large virtual event across Zoom. And then Perth had a face-to-face only event. The 2 main topics were really a review of work anywhere policies. Flexible working has been an on and off topic for the last year or so, and suddenly flexible working was in. And then the Sydney and Melbourne were focusing on running mobility within a pandemic and where we're at, because our biggest issue overall is that we It's now been going for 6 months, and for the initial phases, everyone was in crisis management, right? And then it was rescuing employees wherever they were, and lots of employees were not where they were meant to be. Some were on home leave, there was just a lot going on. And as a result, we ended up doing all sorts of interesting things as a DSP. And then and everyone was kind, like immigration was kind, tax people were kind, as in the tax department was kind. All that kindness is now disappearing because we're beyond the 6 months point.
Yes.
And the reality is that lots of things from a compliance perspective are being triggered. So in our sessions, which involved a whole bunch of corporates and service providers, including the big four, big immigration, international SOS, and so on, is just how do we deal with this? Because there are organizations that are not going back to the office for the rest of the year. In Australia, we have very different borders. The states with almost no cases have basically closed their borders to New South Wales and Victoria, or the capital cities of Melbourne and Sydney, because Melbourne's the worst case. And but having said that, if a relocation has to go ahead, it's still going ahead. It's just really, really complicated with quarantine at the other end. So it's just more complicated, lots of, applications going in for crossing borders, which may or may not get approved. There's still heaps of people coming in and out of Australia, but obviously not the volumes that we had. But everything is more expensive and more complicated and requires lots of people to pay a great deal of attention. And then let's not, I could keep going on, but that's where we're at. We're trying to work within the framework we now have.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Jemima, I'll come to you because as a fellow Australian, you're actually in Melbourne, as Aishikul mentioned. It's one of the worst hit at the moment, but obviously these things we know change all the time. What do you see as the main challenges for your business? Because you're all about moving people. And, as a mobility partner in Australia and beyond, how are the restrictions affecting you, and what do you see otherwise?
So I'm in Victoria in Australia, and we're currently in stage 4 lockdown. So it's a very severe lockdown. You can't leave the house unless you're an essential services worker, or you need to go and get groceries, or you have a medical appointment. So we're allowed out the house for 1 hour a day. So we're in this lockdown until the 13th of September. But having said that, the rest of Australia do not have as severe restrictions as us. But the thing that's the same is we can't go through to the different borders. So it's really difficult for moves within Australia. And then, of course, we can't travel internationally, and we can't come into Australia easily. So these things have impacted our business with removal management, and we've definitely had to put some different processes in place to be able to still relocate our clients. I mean, we're still relocating people. We're still very busy, which you wouldn't expect, but people still need to move, especially corporate clients. They're still relocating for work. So it's been a really interesting time. Things like air freight for household goods, pet relocations, very difficult because the flights have decreased, but the prices have gone up. So we're also seeing levies on certain services because there's a huge demand for pet relocations. There's now a COVID levy in some instances. We're also seeing quarantine periods needed when you come into a certain country. So depending on where you're moving from and to, the move is completely changing, which we're not used to. Usually it's a standard process wherever you're moving from and to. We know exactly the timeframes and what's needed with customs and all those sorts of things. But at the moment, there's lots of different variables which are changing the global mobility industry. So for us, it's very unprecedented, which it is for everyone, but it's mainly very stressful for the relocatee and also the corporate, because the costs are fluctuating and changing based on what services that relocatee needs for that move.
Yeah. Okay, all right, thank you. Well, we'll get on to some of the practical solutions that we've discussed previously a little later, because I think they're really interesting. Phoebe, you're speaking to us from the UK, I know, but your business, again, is global. You've got several interests in APAC, I believe, and you're obviously dealing with a myriad of regulations as a corporate accommodation provider. At the same time, I think when we spoke previously, you told me that despite all the challenges, you've actually been busier than ever. Can you tell us why that should be, please?
Of course. So obviously in April and March, there were a reduced number of new mobility initiations. Naturally, the bookings evolved to extensions of existing bookings, as well as last-minute relocation and repatriation. But in May and June, though, we started to see quite a turnaround in number of inquiries, which was mostly powered by a gradual remobilization of employees. So assignments and relocations, which were previously put on hold, started to be processed.
Yes.
Particularly driven by companies actually prospering during the pandemic, such as technology and retail giants offering lockdown and vital necessities online, as well as companies delivering cloud computing, e-commerce, gaming is another big one as well. So I'd like to say that international moves have been driven by mostly calculated, strategic growth-driven businesses to ensure continuity. So things like corporate tax structure, as well as initiations to open up new distribution and logistics centers, as well as robotic factories. So they decided to move forward with the relocations, even when local restrictions or company policies even mean that working from home for the near future. It's important to highlight that being in the right time zone with a local destination team is very important. So depending on the location of the employee, they will have to usually register as a resident within the first month so that they can apply for a bank account, register with a GP, a doctor, hospital, apply for a tax residence, so that they can be paid in local currency, so on and so forth. So we saw many requests from clients for work desk in the apartment at the moment. Bedroom requests for couple or even for individuals, so that they can use the extra bedroom as an office space.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, we'll come back to you again, obviously, on some of the practical things. Okay, Emery, if I can come to you. I think that point about corporate tax is actually an important one for mobility, isn't it? I know we've talked previously about the increase in virtual assignments, but in many sectors, such as yours, where you're manufacturing, certain jobs just have to be carried out by a person who's actually on the ground. But at the same time, in the present climate, cost is more important than ever, isn't it? What can you do about that?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. All industries are now in cost containment mode, having done with the crisis management phase for most. Surely, many areas of businesses are being looked at to recover the tremendous loss in the revenues. However, I agree that now more than ever, diversity of talent is needed to maintain that competitive strategy. So talent mobility will undoubtedly continue, just in a different shape and form. There may be tactics such as virtual assignments, certainly one among the hot topics in the GM communities today, but it is not for everyone. There may be roles, tax and immigration conditions that make this not a viable option for an assignment. Another increasingly hot topic in the GM networks are global nomads and how governments could be faster in implementing more aggressive immigration policies to accommodate this emerging global group. Global nomads cater to the digital natives, the employees who are quite comfortable with the use of technology to deliver highly productive work regardless of where they are in the world. But I will not be surprised that there will be more creative ways to deliver this talent requirement with the new phase of the market brought about by the pandemic. my personal take on this is that the faster that we accept that things will and should now be different, the faster we can recover and thrive even more.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. And, you know, the purpose of this discussion is not to be negative nor to be unrealistically positive about these things. But as I said, you know, we have to, it looks as though we're going to be living with this for some time until we have a really effective vaccine or other measures to control it. We have to find a way of working through it, don't we? So I think that brings us on very nicely to the practical solutions that you've all been employing. So Jemima, if I can come to you first. We've heard a little about some of the challenges from you earlier, but now can you tell us more about the solutions that you've been using?
Sure. So with our industry and removal management, it's usually a very systemized and process-driven business that we run, but we've had to change some of our systems because things are operating differently at the moment. And one of the things that we've started doing at the beginning of the move process is just doing a pre-move COVID briefing where we sit down with the client and the relocatee and we just update them on all the real-time COVID updates because they're changing every day. So depending on where that person is moving to, we will just update them on all of the possible implications of moving to that country, things such as quarantine, the airline issues, you know, the pet relocation issues, any port delays, all these sorts of things will change the move and also add a little bit more risk. So it's just a matter of implementing that process so that the corporate client can then make an informed decision about whether they move forward with that relocation. And that's really important because we don't want additional costs at a later stage for the relocatee because they can find that quite stressful that they have to ask for approval of those additional services. So it's just being aware of the possible implications due to COVID-19 at the start of the move process.
So it's transparency is key, really. I think it's one of the things you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely it is. It's making both the relocatee and the client aware of the possible implications at the very start so that we don't find them out at a later date. Obviously with COVID-19, things can change, so we can't advise them of absolutely everything, but everything that we do know based on the government websites and the removalists updating us, the pet relocation companies, car relocation companies updating us, we can then brief that corporate client and relocatee, and then they make that informed decision. The second step that we've implemented in our process is just doing pre-move date check-ins. So usually with our clients, they're very organized and we usually know a good 4 weeks ahead of time when the move dates are, everything's locked in, and we might see a few little changes, but nowadays we're seeing a lot of changes because of the airplane bookings. They can change 3 days before and they can change drastically to 6 weeks time. So we now do a 14-day prior check-in, we do a 7-day prior to the move date check-in and a 3-day check-in. And we really encourage this because it means that we can be kept up to date with any updates that we need, and we can make prompt changes, efficient changes for that relocatee and update the corporate as well on any changes. The biggest reason for this is because there could be additional costs with cancelling a booking, and also the stress involved for that relocatee, just knowing that we're there to receive those updates. And sometimes they don't think to update anyone else because they're really stressed. It's a really stressful time when you move. I mean, no one wants to move internationally. It's not fun. So by having those forced check-ins, we're able to obtain the information we need. And we really recommend that. And then the final change that we've made is just a backup plan. So we don't usually have a backup plan because the move usually flows perfectly fine. There's never really any drastic issues that could happen close to the move date with sea freight, air freight, pet or car. The biggest one probably would just be the pet, with anything to do with the pet, but we can always put them into boarding and facilitate those arrangements at last minute. But with COVID-19, we're seeing the flights being cancelled. We're seeing all sorts of things with COVID testing needing to be done, quarantine could be required when they arrive. Therefore, their goods are ready for delivery and they might need to go into storage. The client might need an Airbnb. There's all sorts of things that can happen at the moment. So we have a backup plan already organized before the move even commences. So one, that's really positive for the corporate because they understand what the possible additional costs could be before they have to pay for them. And also the client, the relocatee also knows that this might have to happen. So in terms of stress relief, they know that that could happen. So they don't get completely traumatized when their goods go into storage or they have to go in an Airbnb and they can't even relocate. So there's some of the things that we've put into place, which this year I didn't expect those processes to be put into place, but they're really important because we're the messenger between the relocatee and the corporate. So we have to make sure that all of the arrangements are seamless and we're there to support both parties. So these have just helped us to manage the variances we're seeing due to COVID-19.
Okay, I wanted to ask, have you actually had to implement the backup plan at all yet?
We actually have. We've had to implement it twice. So it's been really worthwhile having, and it's not difficult to implement once it's arranged. In our industry, it's all about being organized and just having that set and pre-approved and tentatively booked in, and then we can finalize the booking if needed. We don't plan for it to go ahead. We don't necessarily want it to, but it's there if the client needs it. So we have had to put a client's goods in storage, and there's been issues with a pet relocation. One of our pets was actually delayed 2 months earlier in the year because they could not get the cat onto a flight. So having that backup plan is really important.
Yes, so it just gives everyone peace of mind. Thank you. Okay. And Aishagul, with your other hat on as a DSP, can you tell us, what are the, obviously you've had to look at home visits and school visits, doing those differently. How have you managed that?
Okay, so for us, it's actually the earliest conversations with the assignees that are the most important, because our goal is to obviously build rapport and explain to them what next, what is and isn't possible in terms of their relocation compared to what they may have expected in the past. So that trust building is crucial, and then discussing how we're going to conduct the home search, the school search, and the orientation. So the orientations, you have to understand, for the first few months, we were doing exits rather than relocations in. So that wasn't happening. So only recently are relocations being considered, and they are mostly targeted for the rest of the year. But there is, so the early conversations that we used to have are actually longer than they were. And more families are making the decision for us to find the housing ahead of their move. Okay, but at the same time, we have had a couple of moves where we've discussed how we're going to do the home search, because a few people were disrupted with their home search activity with COVID-19 and all the restrictions came in. And we put it on hold for a few weeks, and then we all realized that this was going to keep going and that they couldn't stay in temporary accommodation. So we made the decision to arrive separately at some viewings, still present for the relocating individual, but not necessarily, and doing the 1.5 meter distancing. Also, in some cases, the consultant and the assignee decided that they would be okay in the same car, but the assignee sitting in the back and the consultant at the front. Again, these are individual decisions, but we discussed how we all felt about how we were conducting the activity. But by and large, most of the activity that we are engaged in at this point in time is using FaceTime or WhatsApp video or just video in general to show them the layout of the home, show them literally the neighbours, because they can use Google as well. But the consultant explaining while this house, for example, this house looks great, agree with you, but next door they're building a new home and it's not going to get finished. And because you're working from home now, you're not going to enjoy the fact that while you're at home, there's construction going on next door. Now, you won't get that from the website that says, here's a nice house. Whereas your consultant would go, you're not going to enjoy living here for these reasons. And so we see building trust and understanding exactly where they're coming from and what they want to achieve. But we're now having to use a much more careful, nuanced conversation. I guess that's probably the best way of explaining it. So it is there is more conversation than ever before, but probably not more than there would be if they're in the car with you, if you know what I mean, because we are constantly in discussion with our clients, right, as to what is it about this house that you liked, or this neighborhood, or this school, or all of those things. And we are finding that the schools are actually pretty helpful. They're not, but no one wants to talk to you. I don't know if other countries have this as intensely, but in Australia, if you want public schooling, you have to live within the catchment of the school. And the more popular the school, the more restricted the catchment. So it's almost impossible to have, in fact, you can't. You can't have the school interview till you show them a lease. Okay?
Right, okay.
So you can imagine, can't have the interview.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So private schools are different, but public schools, it is that restricted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the logistics of all of this, the planning side as to when are they going to fly out, how long are they going to be in quarantine, and it's 2 weeks at the moment, even within Australia. Okay. Yeah. So other than if you're going into Melbourne, you probably don't go into quarantine if you're coming in from Queensland or Western Australia, because we are relatively free. Whereas anyone from Melbourne or Sydney will have to go into quarantine. And these are changing daily.
Yes. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's sort of, you're having to try and plan with a longer, sort of an elongated process. But at the same time, you can't really plan because everything could change as a moment's notice. But I think one of the things that some of the things you're talking about, it seemed to me, is as much as anything, you're giving those assignees emotional support. In a non-medical way, it's kind of mental health, well-being support as much as anything. It's not just the practical, is it? Sounds to me you're all doing that to an extent. Sorry.
I've always believed in that. Having been an expat myself, and an expat with children, without children and with children, I can't, emphasize how important it is to have someone that you can trust on the ground where you're going.
Yes.
And that person has an empathic nature and really understands where you're at and wants to make a difference.
Yes.
And so that culture is very strong within my own organization and my own team, but is generally very strong in a DSP environment. And we just basically put in the extra hours to make sure that people feel comfortable. Yeah. That's all we can do.
Yes. I think that's a very good point. Vivi, I'm going to come to you. I think as someone who formerly worked in the corporate finance sector, you must be acutely aware of the need for tight cost control. And you've worked on some solutions in terms of technology to try and cut costs, or at least make them more transparent. What else have you done in practical terms to ensure assignees' safety too?
Yeah, of course. So our technology really is this fully customizable, cloud-based. We call it business to employee platform, which contains a database system which are designed to promote cost containment, price transparency, and then improve the overall experience of the assignees when they're looking for temporary housing. As our system fetches live rates, availabilities, and all other content like images, amenities, information around the property, within the property directly from other property management systems. This really saves suppliers time and therefore costs, as it eliminates all the manual work behind the scene.
Mhm.
As Claire mentioned before, yes, duty of care is really the focus of our offering. So even though we use technology as much as possible to automate the whole process, we still focus a lot on human-centric approach. We have 24/7 reservation and guest experience teams to answer all questions from the assignees from the point of search all the way until they check out. So with COVID, we launched a Travel with Confidence program, which really outlines stringent hygiene, cleaning protocols, along with the rest of the industry. However, this has now gone beyond just a protocol, as now accountability must also be demonstrated with records of who and when things like cleaning, inspection, and maintenance are done before the assignees arrive and check into the property.
Yes.
We also provide playbooks of how to survive in isolation, because as soon as they arrive and when there is quarantine in place, that is the focus. So offering now has evolved really overnight from just a seamless journey to adapting things like touchless technology, with the rise of digital smart lock, digital registration, and even to the point where companies are considering things like virtual concierge services using voice technology like Alexa or
Right.
Hey, for example.
Yes. Okay. I was going to say, I think, I spoke to Samantha Elliott on one of our I think it was our global webinar from Preferred Corporate Housing. And one of the things that came out of that discussion was that actually, it's much easier to be able to manage and, as you say, have that accountability in terms of who is in a property at any one time with the sort of accommodation that you're talking about, so that if there is a problem, presumably you can then trace who else is around that person who might have had any contact with them, and so on. So self-service models were already quite popular, but I think it sounds as though also some of the companies that you've been dealing with, that would suit their employees pretty well. Am I right in terms of, sorry, I don't mean to make too many stereotypes.
This technology had already existed before COVID.
Yeah.
But the adoption to use this technology obviously has risen in the last 6 months or so. So yesterday I spoke to one of the providers who specializes in delivering the software. It's really impeccable. They've done the level of meticulousness and the detail. Literally showing who has been there, what time were they there, how long was the cleaning done, was it enough to justify the hygiene and cleaning protocol. And, they look at it from the point of view of the personnel as well as the room within each property, even to the point of what has been done to the dishwasher. So these records are available. The question is now, for us to figure out what kind of level of or access to information can we give, or are we allowed to have with GDPR and other data protection security measures.
Yes.
So that's the next chapter for us. But yes, those data are available, can be used and be traced back.
Yes. Yes. Okay, thank you. I think, the technology is an interesting point, and the data absolutely too. That's a whole other nightmare to unpick. But in terms of technology, Emery, I think we've all had to get used to using far more technology. We've all become much more proficient, which in many ways is great. I mean, it's a good thing. I feel I've learned a lot during this whole period too. I've had to embrace things that previously I was totally unfamiliar with. But at the same time, we heard from Aishkul about the pressures on duty of care and so on. As a mobility professional, what are your thoughts about the practical changes that you're seeing in terms of, supporting your employees?
Yeah, look, these are the things that we know at this point. First is that there is a real and ongoing threat still to health and safety and And this actually changed the way the employees want to work. The virus is still out there with no clear solution in the horizon. But data shows that most employees rather work from home, even beyond the pandemic. And the second thing that we know for sure is that technology works. We have tried it for how many months now, and it seems that it actually survives us through these times. And now more and more we realize that work is no longer a reference to a place, and that productivity is really not sacrificed with working remotely. So with knowing those things that we know now, we see that remote working and virtual assignments are indeed temporary solutions for some, and even long-term solutions for other roles. And as I've said, there would probably be more creative solutions that would come up apart from these. We're very agile that way. I see that in the global mobility community every day. But more than these solutions, we see a great opportunity to improve and accelerate technology-based services. And I'm really, happy to hear that there are already, things like this available from the panel here. And one thing that I'm really looking forward to see is, I was really looking forward to see was the tracking of assignee whereabouts. As I anticipate more and more people would be okay in sharing certain information in exchange for being assured that support will be there, right? We tend to be very conservative before because of a lot of restrictions, but now that it has happened, I'm pretty sure we've actually built the case for employees to say yes to sharing information and using these technology actually. And apart from virtual meetings that we all have, the emergence or enhancement of virtual cultural orientations already happening before, but virtual home search also, virtual packing and unpacking of household goods are getting to be a common practice these days. I see that almost every day. Cultural orientation, I said, virtually has been happening, but cultural orientation in this virtual world is different from the traditional services we know from before. The question that we need to be addressed now is, how can a talent assimilate into the culture of the host country and host teams? And that this is underpinned by modes of communication that are a combination of face-to-face and virtual, or even entirely virtual. So, as we speak, these things are happening and developing, and I'm really positive in terms of how fast the technology and companies can catch up with what we need right now.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. I think that brings us on very nicely to the final part of our discussion, and we're getting a bit short of time now, so I'll ask you to be fairly brief. But nevertheless, I know you've got some strong points to make. So let's just have a look at some of the positive changes and the lessons learned from this. Phoebe, what do you see as the main positives that you've seen since this whole situation arose?
Sure. Yes, as we mentioned before, the rate of adoption to technology is now at unprecedented rate, not only for the younger generations like millennials and Gen Z, but also for baby boomers. And this applies in an effort to really drive that price transparency, cost containment, demonstration of accountability, as I mentioned before, but it could also mean a more coordinated response from both the global mobility, travel industry, as well as the government, financially and logistically, one that goes beyond just airline bailouts or fundings for innovation. So the whole world could potentially benefit from what Australia and Singapore have done really well during COVID. Yep. And from an industry perspective, it could also mean a more analytical transformation that enables coordination amongst the players, from marketing budget or even destination promotion, similar to what the Mayor of London here has done really well with London and Partners. I think their motto is telling London's story brilliantly. So now the government, I think, has this rare opportunity to start reimagining their role in providing data infrastructure, as well as capabilities to investigate new and more innovative models that work well for all of us to start recovering from this. And perhaps this is the only way, the only mechanism that could work during a recovery period that has never been required before in history.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That's really interesting. Thank you. Jemima, I want to come to you because obviously you detailed a really thorough set of practical measures that you've implemented. And you know, to an extent, as everyone has been, you've been responding to the situation. But are there any of those measures that you're going to take forward, you know, even if things get back to some kind of normal?
Yeah, we definitely will. I mean, it's been a very big learning experience and we have had to adapt very quickly. But the one thing we have really enjoyed is building that relationship further with our relocatees, because, you know, everything in our industry is driven by processes and systems. However, having those check-ins, the Zoom check-ins with our clients has really benefited. We found they've been a lot more at ease and definitely not as stressed leading up to their move date. So that's something that we will definitely keep in our system moving forward, you know, focusing on that high touch approach. And yeah. I think it also allows you to look at your business differently. I mean, we've definitely adapted with our move managers. We have a big team and they're all working remotely and the systems are flowing completely normally. So it's been a great experience for us to go through in terms of understanding how we can also adapt with our employees and make sure that their work situation is positive for them and adapting it to what they like. So we've really realized that your employees can work from anywhere and work productively. They don't need to be sitting in an office.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And Aishagul, plenty of challenges in every business, but especially at the moment, I think for some of the more traditional sides of mobility, what are the positives that you'll be taking out of this situation?
The positives really is the recognition that that organisations need to put more effort into supporting their assignees, because often they're working, well, they will continue to work remotely. So just addressing mental health issues, preparing families better beforehand for the assignment, and but also making some decisions around who should be on assignment. I think that's being looked at more thoroughly, because moving forward, I don't see international assignments happening in the volumes that they were happening pre-COVID. As you know, we've proven remote working works, but what that looks like from a compliance perspective, I think that's what everyone is working through. So the positive for ourselves is that it's almost business as usual in terms of how we support people, because I've always believed in supporting assignments from day one, from the moment people find out they're going on assignment till after they've moved into a home, and then weeks after that, just checking in repeatedly to make sure everyone is adjusting well, and then reporting that back to the company. So that whole process has been an integral part of our business. It's just become even more important. I think that's probably what I'm trying to say.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. If I can just, before I come to you, Emery, if I can just give a little plug for FEM and particularly for Aishagul, keeping those chapters going during this whole time, you know, doing virtual events and so on. I know it's not easy, but I think it's been great that you've supported the community there. I think it's a really valuable thing that you've been doing. So thank you very much for that. And I'll just mention that we'll be coming to Australia next year in person.
We look forward to it
as well. So yes, we're really excited about that. We'll be having a one-day conference there again, which is just great. I'm so looking forward to it and really looking forward to working with you again. So Emery, you have the last word on this. What do you think? How do you think this will change mobility for the better, really? I know we've talked a lot about the problems, but what are the good things that you think have come out of this?
Yeah, I could say the pandemic had been an accelerator more than anything else in our world, actually. Companies now are ensuring that assignments are really purposeful. There is now a more deliberate discussion on the balance among business need, employee development, and the company's duty to keep the assignees safe and healthy, rather. In my opinion, every company should have been thinking about these, long before. But I guess this is one of those that were reminded to us by the pandemic, right? As an accelerator. Indeed, cost is a highlight now, as not only losses need to be recovered, but there is anticipation that relocation costs will increase and vendors would also need to recover. But now more than ever, global mobility is placed in a seat at the table of talent discussion. If not yet, then I suggest companies should start doing this. Talent mobility need to be successful, and we cannot afford trial and error at this time, especially. So companies know now that they need to invest in obtaining ahead of time the right information on tax, immigration, health, and safety risks, and bring in the factors for successful assimilation. And these are the expertise residing in global mobility. So it's a good time for us in global mobility to really, shine and show what we've got.
Yeah, great. I think that's perfect note to end upon. Thank you so much to all of you. I think, I'm really grateful to that you've shared some of these solutions with us. And I think, it's really interesting how much thought has gone into these things and from so many different aspects. I think it's very reassuring to the community and the industry as a whole. So thank you very much again for your time and for speaking to me today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much again, panel, especially for all those practical tips. Time for a very short break, but then I hope you'll join us for the second Mobility Masterclass of the Summit, where you can find out what should be in your Global Mobility Toolkit and how to reboot your program. Welcome back. I'm very glad you could join us for this next session.
Mobility Masterclass. Gearing up for Global Mobility 2.0. Your speakers are Archana Srinivasan, HR Business Partner, Head of HR Asia at Atkins. Nandakumar Kirupanadam, Head of International Assignments, Shared Services at Atkins.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today's session. We'll start off with a quick introduction. So my name is Archana, and I'm based in Singapore, and I've been working with Atkins for about 8 years now. Atkins is an engineering consulting firm and a member of the SNC Loveland Group. And SNC Loveland, for those of you who may not know, is a fully integrated professional services and project management consultancy firm. And we have about 50,000 employees globally who are working out of offices in more than 50 countries, speaking over 70 languages and representing about 130 nationalities. In Asia, we have about 4,500 employees, just to give you an idea of the scope that we're talking about in terms of our job remits. So these 4,500 employees are spread across Greater China, Southeast Asia, India, and Australia. So my role is to look after HR for the Asia region, and I also business partner with the Atkins business, which is internally called as Engineering, Design, and Project Management. Today, I'm joined by my colleague Nandu, whom I'll just request to introduce himself.
Thank you, Archana. Hello, everyone, and it is nice to be back on the FEM APAC forum. Thank you, Claire, for providing this wonderful opportunity. This is Nandakumar Kripanandam, based out in Bangalore in India. I have 20 plus years of experience in HR and global mobility. I'm responsible for global mobility business partner for APAC region. Also, I lead the mobility shared services based out in Bangalore, supporting UK, Europe, Middle East, Africa. In terms of the mobility program, we have around 500 plus moves on an annual basis, and we move across 40 plus countries. So why we move people? I think this is a very interesting question. So a lot more companies do not have a structured approach and program of global mobility. I think it's important to understand the reason and intent of move, which will really help us to support in a very right way for the business. In our organization, we have some of the reasons why we move people. One is the knowledge sharing. So in knowledge sharing, where we send some of our employees basically to understand some of the basic processes, or meeting the colleagues, or to collaborate, or just to know how things work in the different countries. So this is absolutely non-work, just to understand how things work in different countries. So generally this category where we recommend either it's a short business travel or extended business travel, or sometimes the short-term assignments. The next one is the strategic growth. I think this is a very key thing for us, because where we have to have a new market or we have to grow a market, that's where we use this category to move our assignees. Primarily, we move the long-term assignments where someone will go more than like 2 years or 3 years, where they will develop or set up a new market. The third one is a technical leadership. Here, purely based on the business need or a client requirement, where we move some of our very senior executive to do a technical role in a country where they need to support our client or for our needs. Again, this is primarily will be a long-term, or we do have some of the permanent and local transfers, etc. The next one is a succession planning. Here it's more of a developmental assignments where we have to provide more exposure, or we need to plan some of our employees to have exposure, international exposure, etc. So that's where we use this category. If we have any request where for the trailing spouses or for any personal requirements where they have to relocate to a different country, then of course we do support this. Again, it's a very minimal basic support, but provided there is a business opportunity in that country. The next one is very key for us, the projects, where we move for large projects and also the medium and small projects where it varies from short term to long term, medium term, and transfers. So we do heavy on the project assignments within Atkins. The next one is the career development. Of course, this is very key for us, where we encourage our graduates and high potentials, where we provide opportunity for their careers on providing international exposure. Primarily, will be a very short rotations. The next one is the business leadership, where again, this is a developmental assignment for our leadership, where it can be a future CEO or it can be leading a specific sector, etc. So that's where we do this category. Let me just quickly take you through our operating model. The mobility operating model is a three-tiered approach. We have a basic, the tier one is our technology tool and systems. We use Assignment Pro, where we have completely employee and manager self-service. And of course, we do have the other help resources for our mobile population. Then the tier two is our shared services. So primarily the mobility advisors, regional mobility advisors, they manage, they're responsible, and we have a single point of contact for our assignees. So that's the tier two. And tier three is the governance and the mobility business partner. So that's where we ensure that the compliance and the governance of the overall program is managed well. So, and we will talk about what's happening now in the current scenario. The strategic growth as a primary reason where even now we move people. One of our the primary focus country or the strategic growth country is Australia in Asia Pacific, where we are moving our colleagues from UK, Canada, and Middle East into Australia. So which continues to happen even now, because that's where we are growing our market. That's where we need our senior leadership to be part of those developmental aspects. So, and that's one of the key market where we are working in moving people into Australia. The next one is the career development. Though this is not a right time where we don't like really move a lot of graduates or others for the developmental assignments. However, if there is a business opportunity, I can give an example where we have recently moved one of our employees from Hong Kong into Sri Lanka. We had a business opportunity and we thought she's an high potential. We thought, why not give that opportunity? So that's again a diversity as well as a career opportunity for the employee to get an international exposure. Over to you, Archana, on the next two projects and the business leadership.
Okay, thanks, Nandu. So I'll touch upon projects first. So I think projects is a really important part, especially for a business like ours, where we are more involved in infrastructure projects. So historically, we've always been used to moving people to projects, and with the current challenges with travel, etc. We do try to move projects to people or work to people, but it doesn't really always happen, because especially in infrastructure, large scale projects, you really need boots on the ground. So of late, we've still been continuing project related moves, and I'll probably talk about one of the interesting examples on the project side. So we recently won a significant project in the Greater Bay Area, and we've been mobilizing staff from across locations. And the project director, for example, had to be moved from Singapore. And where we would normally do a transfer in the current scenario, we've had to actually give the few options to the employee to choose from, wherein, in the current context, the employee chose to not move the family. So he wanted to go on a split family basis. And as you all know, if it's a split family kind of scenario and an assignment rather than a transfer, then the costs slightly go up. But I think fortunately for us, the business was understanding and was okay to consider a different form of assignment in that case. Also on business leadership, I think Nandu also touched upon it when we were talking about strategic growth. So we do often move business leaders, especially those who have been successful, because we just naturally expect them to replicate that success story in a new location. And Nandu mentioned about a lot of mobility happening to Australia. So we've moved a few leaders there. I'll also talk about maybe one interesting example where we moved a business leader to Singapore. And I think for those of you from Singapore, you'll know there have been very severe restrictions on moving people into Singapore, maybe like many other countries. So we had this unique case where this leader moved. The leader was an expat, however the family was local, so the partner was a Singaporean. And similar to most other countries, the partner could move in because priority is given to citizens and residents. However, this expat employee of ours couldn't move. And although the work visa was approved, the re-entry permit was kind of stuck and it took a long time to get approved. And, these kind of scenarios pose severe challenges for the mobility team. And, that's one aspect where we've had to stay resilient, trying to take care of all needs for all stakeholders. I think in that context, maybe we can move on and share a few more examples of recent challenges that we've had on the mobility landscape. Maybe over to you, Nandu.
Thank you, Archana. Of course, when you're talking about the recent challenges, it's an unprecedented time with COVID. So specific to the global workforce, we do have some of the challenges. One, like a lot of expats would they wanted to repatriate it. Of course, we have repatriated some of our assignees at the early stage during April, May period. Also in line with that, we also had some of the assignment extension. For example, where one scenario we had in Thailand, where though the assignment got over, where employee has to move to another assignment to Indonesia, we had some of the challenges since the borders were closed and we couldn't get all the clearances, etc. And his family is struck. So we face a bit challenge in, though the government was kind enough, they done the extension during the pandemic, but it's very difficult to explain to a client and make sure that where there is a dire need of this specific individual to be in Indonesia. So we had some difficulties, but however, we managed it better with the government assistance, both in Thailand and Indonesia. The second one where we had some of the cases for our employees who were struck in Saudi Arabia, the Indian employees in Saudi Arabia, where because of the lockdown and because of no flights, etc., we faced a lot of challenges in bringing back them, though the assignment got continued, but on a personal grounds they were wanted to come back. So we had some challenges and we have to work with the government both in Saudi and in India to bring some of our employees from in those countries. So still we do have some of the standard assignees in some of the countries where we are closely working with the government and with the other agencies to bring them back as well. Over to you, Archana, for rest three of those questions.
Thank you, Nandu. I think another scenario which I'd like to share is on employees wanting to move to another country. I think these generally happen, and some of these could be, personal requirements. There are some location combinations that are like favorites, like a lot of our UK employees, for example, they would really like to go and settle down in, places like Australia. And many a times we try and facilitate those kind of moves. And what we've also seen is recently, the current situation has also accelerated some of the personal plans. And in places like Australia, where it's really challenging to get the, travel restriction exemption, we've been recently quite successful in that. But of course, it takes a lot of effort because it's a sort of joint handshake between the mobility team, the HR business partnering team, the business, and the assignee, himself or herself. So that's been a recent challenge, trying to understand the local legislations, local government requirements, and trying to make your case to make mobility happen. Another interesting example would be on employees working from home in another country. So we recently at the start of the year had a situation where we won this large commission in China and we had to move our employees to China on that important project for us. And it was all mostly expats apart from the local talent. And travel restrictions started coming in place and we couldn't move these employees. However, the client wanted to really kickstart the project and carry on despite what was happening. And as we all know, China recovered pretty quickly, so the client was pretty okay, and they were even fine for the employees to work remotely. However, as mobility and HR professionals, we need to, bear the various risks in mind, whether it is permanent establishment risk or payroll, immigration, or tax-related compliance, etc. So again, in that case, we had to review the whole scenario, get all the various advice required to ensure that the arrangement works, and where necessary, reroute some of the contracts or engagements to other countries as need be, because end of the day, compliance is king, so to say. And lastly, maybe talk a little bit about employees stuck in a third country or in transit. So we've also had our fair share of these interesting, situations where the mobility team had to really think out of the box and on the spot. So we had this employee, for example, who was ready to relocate. As you all know, the shipment goes out first, and then the employee with his family, with 3 children, initiated travel. And unfortunately, on the way, the host borders got shut. And in the last minute, we had to sort of help the employee go back and wait for the right time when the move can happen again. And the shipment eventually arrived, but it's still taking more time for the employee and his family to arrive. So these kind of challenges keep appearing all the time, and as I mentioned before, our mobility team has had to work pretty much nonstop, sometimes round the clock, trying to sort some of these challenges. On that note, we also wanted to share some practical tips or like tools which both HR and mobility professionals can use, because we are now in a sort of transformation journey. And as they say, change is constant, but we are now probably in a situation where it's a phase of accelerated change. So in the next few slides, we'd like to share some practical ways in which you can reboot your mobility experience. So again, over to you, Nandu.
Thank you, Archana. So interestingly, with the current challenges with pandemic, we have come up with the 4-step approach to reboot our global mobility experience. Again, it worked for us. I'm sure some of you can definitely use this model. It's a 4-step. One is the analyze, prepare, execute, and evaluate. Analyze to review the changes to the global mobility landscape in your current environment, internal and external. So here what we have done is that we first understood, like, is there any impact to our key markets? Is there impact to our key clients? Is there any changes in the major regulatory requirements, including specific to COVID? So I think it's important for us to understand the multiple scenarios, both from the business, compliance, and all aspects. So that way it's easier for us to plan and prepare and execute and evaluate the situation. Next step is prepare. Here we are seeking feedback from our stakeholders and prepare a plan of action. So what we have done is that we had a regular review with our senior leaders, with our key project managers, and also with our employees, because it's not just the where the business agree to send someone, it's about the employee acceptance as well. So are they willing to travel during this time? So it's about making sure that we are aligning all the aspects of our corporate taxes, our business, the project managers, so all coming together and preparing a plan of action collaboratively. Then execute. It's important that though from our company perspective, our policies are very flexible and we have core and flex, and absolutely it's easy to navigate and use it. But I think it's important in your organization, do you have the flexible policies and processes, etc., which will encompass and enable you to operate in the new normal? So I think sometimes you have to review your long-term, whatever the benefits you have, or do you have if you don't have a business travel, then how do you manage your short-term assignments, etc. So it's important to review the cost and your compliance and few bits and pieces, so that including your policies, etc. The last one is evaluate. It's very important even during this time. It's to have a success measures, because end of the day, it's important to have the right metrics. Also, how do we measure that? So few things what we have done both from the execution oriented and also from the strategic oriented. First, on the effectiveness perspective, it's important to see that the average number of days to confirm a resource to fulfill a critical deployment need. So though we track in terms of time of deployment, etc., it's important to see the duty of care and does our employee is being safely moved from one country to another country? Does the employees or family absolutely feel secured? And we have done all possible support to them. So in addition to that, the time of deployment, it's important to understand the duty of care as well. The next one is important to still measure because of where we have challenges in terms of cost. Make sure that unless required, do not allow policy exceptions. So again, track those policy exceptions, make sure that it's available there. On the impact perspective, it's important to understand, do we really help the business to whatever the major clients we have, do we make sure that we are moving and making sure that we are meeting those requirements for those major clients? And does the whatever the average revenue growth and client satisfaction rates for our clients with deployments, whatever we have. And last one is about the still we don't have major developmental assignments, but still it's important to see that do we have the percentage of key leadership or critical assignments during this period. So these are the few things which I would like to highlight as part of these success measures. Thank you, Archana. Over to you.
Thanks, Nandu. I think you just heard Nandu talk about a simple 4-step approach. What we also wanted to, leave with you today is a set of few guiding questions, because as they say, the devil is in the detail, and it's really important to, translate our knowledge and our understanding into action. So some of the key questions or guiding questions are here. So firstly, trying to understand what the current situation has an impact on the external market forces. For example, like, has the current situation rendered some markets inaccessible? Like, if I take our company as an example, there are a couple of geographies in Asia, for example, which we have decided that those markets are not going to be accessible for us for a few months to go. So it has now been moved to our 2021 strategy, for example, from a business perspective. But at the same time, in some of our existing markets, things are firing, because what we see is a lot of the government stimulus packages are focused on infrastructure spending. So that provides an opportunity where it probably opens up some of the existing markets to a larger extent. So I think the first key question to ask is, what's happening in the market where the company operates. I think the next is, looking at how this sort of translates into the people strategy or the talent strategy. So for us, after having reviewed how the market forces work, then we'll have to, change the leadership hiring strategy or, the mobility strategy, because now what you're looking at is a set of new markets where mobility has to happen. And then next is, once which are the countries and what sort of talent is required, then studying the mobility challenges in those countries. So that's where you get into a deep dive to understand, what are the recent challenges in those jurisdictions. And then the next key point would be around understanding benefits. So most of the benefits may be, impacted or may need to be adjusted as a result of, the various changes. Even simple things like home leave, for example, a lot of our assignees will not be able to, take home leave as a benefit, which is already provided in the contract. So rather than wait for the, assignee population to come and raise those questions, can we proactively, study what kind of benefits will be impacted by the current situation, and start engaging with business leaders, to try and understand what potential alternate options can be shared and workable for the assignees. Of course, we need to balance business expectations with assignee expectations with organizational constraints, but these are some things to consider. I think few more guiding questions, which I'll request Nandu to add. Hi, Nandu.
Thank you, Archana. I think you talked about the reviewing the benefits and some of the challenges. One of the main benefit, what we have reviewed as an organization, is the medical and travel insurance. So it's very important considering the COVID. We need to make sure that our insurance provider, what are the inclusions and exclusions. So we have reviewed everything and made sure that those things are being informed, and all the documents and everything is provided to our assignees and the family. So we have done and made sure that all the emergency evacuations and including the COVID, everything is covered as part of our insurance, medical and travel as well. The next interesting, which I'm very passionate, is about getting feedback. It's the expat pulse surveys, etc. Right. So we do have our annual surveys to our assignees, and also we use the Net Promoter Score for our business to get feedback. From the employee feedback per se, we had few things which we have received, I would say, in the last couple of years. One is the managing careers. So how do we make sure that we provide a meaningful and challenging assignments to those as part of their career development? The next challenge feedback we receive is they would like to pick and choose their own benefits, what they are entitled for, and they would like to make it more like a self-service mode. Also, in some scenarios, they would like to take it as a cash rather than the benefit. So I think these are the things probably we need to deliberate. What is the right model? Can employee design their own package, etc.? And the last one is about keeping it simple. So how do we keep things simple in mobility world, considering there are some compliance and employee duty of care, etc. But how do we make it simple and seamless? So still we are working on that to make it simple and seamless, but it's a bit of a challenge, and we can continue to receive some feedback on that area. From the business perspective, three things. One is the speed of mobilization. The assignment cost is still a challenge. And last one is the agility and the flexibility. So I think globally, most of the organization do receive these feedback from the business, but we continue to work with all the current challenges. The last one is again a very interesting topic. Has there been an increase in virtual assignments? We do have a small population doing virtual assignments, as not all jobs can be performed remotely for us as an organization, because we do have engineers to be on field, etc. So in general, I would talk about the positive or whatever the pros of this. It's in terms of cost-wise, it doesn't cost much because you don't need to pay all those the assignment benefits and allowances. And in some countries, we do have immigration constraints, etc. So those things can be managed if people are working remotely. But still, I would like to highlight some of the challenges from the mobility perspective. The first one is the tax and compliance consideration. It's important to evaluate your permanent establishment position with your corporate tax team. And also in multiple scenarios, you have to evaluate the individual income tax in their home country, because if they are working for the benefit of the other organization or other country, you have to evaluate your PE and the individual income tax. Next one is the data privacy, GDPR. So it's very important that can the data being shared in other country, can someone access to the data in sitting in remotely working in other country? I think that's a primary thing which you have to really review. The third one is paying the employee might be a challenge, because in some countries there are the foreign exchange regulation, or you can't really pay in a different currency, etc. So how you're going to manage paying the employee is another thing. The last one is the softer aspects, which I would like to cover. Means though some of the benefits for the virtual assignments, but still the collaboration, the cross-cultural issues has to be considered. So I think these are the things which I would, in our experience, I would highlight on the virtual assignments. Moving on to the last slide. So I think it's an interesting one. As an organization, how we evolved the mobility, global mobility journey from super administrator, managing the individual moves, just being a mobility expert, providing some of the compliance advice, etc. So we moved from just a order taker and just focusing on the individual moves and just being a mobility expert to a strategic enabler international talent network and mobility business partner. So here we provide advisory on large projects, and also we have been involved at this time when they are starting the bidding. So we can provide some of the strategic inputs to them that, listen, you can cost this and this takes time, and we can, even for the new country penetration, we can provide a lot of inputs on there. Also, we work with the resourcing and recruitment team to build an international talent network, which is very important to, by their skills, by their competency, and also the willingness of someone to go on international assignments. So how do we get those pool and create proactively to meet the business needs? Another thing which we have evolved over a period of time. Last one, just being a mobility expert, where we are telling, okay, you can't do these things, but how do you be an enabler, being a business partner, understanding and being empathetic to a business, and make the transition from an expert to a business partner? So these are the things I would say from the mobility journey, what we had as an organization.
Thanks, Nandu. And if I can just take a moment to share, our perspective from a business partner angle. I'm talking about the HR business partner side, outside of the mobility function. I think, like Nandu said, there has been a journey, and the journey has been accelerated recently. So previously, if I look at it from the business perspective, it was more focused on cost, because mobility was taken for granted. The assumption was that we can fly people in and out anytime to any part of the world. So the focus was more on internal processes, cost considerations, etc. But I think now the world has changed, where nothing can be taken for granted, literally, and it's a ever-changing scenario. And to some extent, I would say that with the current restrictions, which has impacted people's personal travels, and with everyone working from home, things have gained heightened awareness, and everybody is on the same page, because the situation is the same everywhere. There's a lot of commonality, although what's happening in different countries is different. So I think that has really brought in a closer connection, I would say, between HR, mobility, and the business. And we really are now working more from a business partner perspective, because if it's not a well-oiled and joint machine, then things are likely to break more easily. So I think we've had our fair share of the journey, where now the business really looks forward to a lot of advice, and it's more like Nandu said, in a business partnering fashion, that it's delivered. So it's been great, and I hope you've had your great experiences as well. So thank you once again for joining us today. We hope you found this session useful, and not just our examples of scenarios, but also some of the practical application aspects. If you had something to take away today, then that would have made our day. Thanks again for your valuable time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Archana and Nandu. I think it's particularly interesting to see how effectively you and your teams work together from very different locations and areas of the business. And now for our final break before the closing panel, we'll end on a positive and forward-looking note as we discuss global mobility excellence.
Global Mobility, a view from the top. Your speakers are Adnan Altaf, Reward, Benefits and Mobility Manager, Australia at BAE Systems. Stephen Park, International Mobility Centre at Schneider Electric. Shazzy Tan, Global Mobility Manager at Dyson Singapore. Moderated by Claire Tennant-Skull, Global Director of Content and Events at FEM.
Right, hello and welcome to our closing panel discussion at the FEM APAC Online Summit. I'm very pleased today to have some of our eminent EMAS judges with us and an outstanding winner too. We're calling this a view from the top. We actually called a session that we did a similar one in Americas last year in 2019. And it was a very interesting one. So obviously this year, sadly, because of the COVID situation, we are unable to run the EMAs. We took that decision for everyone's safety and because, of course, everyone is so busy at the moment. But we thought it would be still useful to use the sort of the EMAs criteria as a kind of framework for taking perhaps a longer perspective on what everyone is doing at the moment, because of course with this situation there's been an awful lot of reactive behaviour, understandably, but I think it's still important to review and reassess, refresh what you're doing. So I will ask our speakers to just introduce themselves briefly first of all, and then I'll talk about a little bit about how we're going to frame this discussion. So I'll start with you, Shazzy.
Hi, my name is Shazzy. I'm actually a global mobility manager with Dyson, and I'm based in Singapore. I take care of the region, and I've been in mobility close to 10 years. So it's spanned a lot of industries, including hospitality, manufacturing, banking. So it's been a very rewarding experience, and I'm happy to share today.
Thank you. And Adnan.
My name is Adnan Altaf. I'm a Reward, Benefits and Mobility Manager at BAE Systems Australia. So I look after obviously those key areas in a global defense contracting company called BAE Systems, which is in the defense and aerospace industry. I've had about 14 years of experience in reward, benefits and mobility across a few different industries, largely in Australia.
Thank you. And Stephen, you're in Hong Kong, I think.
Hi, yes, definitely. I'm in the office today. Thank you for inviting me, and hello everyone. I'm Stephen Park. I am the mobility manager in Schneider Electric based in Hong Kong. My remit includes India, China, and what we call the East Asia, Japan, Pacific region. I've been in the mobility industry for quite a long time. Previous organizations include Fonterra and Cisco Systems, and before that I was a tax consultant with the Big Four. So thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you. Right, so obviously our discussion is going to range across, the in-house corporate HR, global mobility and HR professionals, so individuals and teams. And then we'll look a little bit at service providers and how they're faring at the moment and what really makes them stand out. And then lastly, we'll look at the kind of things that you look for normally in the EMAs as judges, and also what it means to be a winner. So hopefully we can look forward to a bumper crop of entries next year. So let's just keep in mind as we talk, there are 4 areas on which the EMAs are judged. And we look at innovation, strategy, results, and impact of the work. And that's really longer term impact of the work. So I think it's useful to keep that in mind. So if we start with part 1, looking at in-house global mobility professionals and teams, what are the key qualities that a mobility team or an individual needs right now? And do you think these have changed in the last 12 months? I think I know what the answer might be here, but I'd be interested to hear the detail. So Shazzy, I'm going to come to you first because you've been an EMAS judge and a highly respected speaker at FEM events, among others, for a number of years. What do you think of those vital qualities?
I think it's changed, and it's changed for the better. COVID has just thrown all of us into the deep end of the pool, and it's time to sink or swim, right? And I think at the moment, the way that the global mobility team has to innovate and think on their feet is even more crucial than it was before. It used to be we struggled with a lot of I want to move tomorrow, get this sorted by today, or it was even yesterday. But now we've got the employee, we've got stakeholders, and we have a lot of government mandates and regulations to follow as well. So I think being flexible, being versatile, and looking at the whole mobility program, including your talent and your COVID. If you have an in-house COVID working team, I think that's also very important to marry then all the processes for a holistic approach. And it's no longer about, just building rapport with the employee, but it actually makes sense when, um, for certain companies, you've had good relationship with certain government agencies, and now is actually the time to kind of make use of that good relationship because it can probably help you have an easier process along the way. So I think from an in-house perspective, I know we rely a lot on our relocation partners to understand a lot of the processes outside of the organization, but internally there's a lot of coordination, there's a lot of compliance and risk management that we need to do.
Yes, yes. I think actually you've touched on something that has always struck me at our events, and that is I think global mobility professionals on the whole have tremendous charisma. They are very personable, amiable people.
Yeah, look at the three of us right here.
Friendly, but it's a friendly community, and I think one of the key skills that I notice amongst you from a sort of slightly removed perspective is that you're very good at engaging people quickly, building, as you say, establishing that rapport almost instantly. Not everyone can do that, so I think that is a key skill actually. Right. So thank you. And Stephen, you've been a winner, a judge, and again spoken at all sorts of events with us and others too. You mentioned a time at the Big Four. You've worked in technology now and food companies, consultancy. So you've worked on the other side of the fence. How do you think this year's changed mobility from the corporate perspective?
Yeah, definitely. It's been a challenging 6 months since COVID-19 came onto our plates from China. And I think the Asia Pacific region has been quite dynamic in this, in that it started off with China and then it quickly moved around this region before it hit Europe. And I think we on this side of the planet were scrambling in February. So I think we've had a bit of a head start compared to the other regions, but I think the sheer magnitude of what's happening outside in Europe and North America and South America is it's quite a different ball game now. But in terms of where it's ended up in Asia, I think we've taken steps fairly early, and I think as an organization, Schneider Electric, for example, went in quite aggressively in terms of looking at should we be evacuating people? Should we be repatriating people? What about cost containment? So a lot of these questions came up fairly early in the game for us. And in terms of the strategy, we did have a very decentralized model around that as well. So we were looking at, a lot of the decisions were best made locally. And that's been quite a successful way to deal with COVID-19 for us as well. In terms of where mobility sits in, we seem to be, I think the doors were knocked fairly early. We came up with our thinking around it. And I think what has happened 6 months later is that now that we're looking to remobilize, that interaction between global mobility, talent, that's becoming quite strong, and we're getting asked the right questions fairly early in the piece. Whereas I kind of look at it 12 months ago, we probably weren't getting asked those same type of questions. So I do find in terms of us getting a seat at the table, it really has accelerated our sort of integration with the rest of the business strategies around relocation.
Right. So what senior executives are actively seeking your views on things would you say?
Correct. Yes. I think, as Shazzy mentioned, there are lots of compliance issues. Those are changing quite rapidly as well. So I
Yes.
think a lot of our senior executives are expatriate employees themselves. I think they do see the value in coming to ask the question upfront. And you know, as you mentioned, the personalities we have here, we
Yes.
don't like saying no to things. We are quite communicative, and for us, it's all about collaboration and making sure that people get the right answers early so that they can make the best decisions quickly.
Yes. Excellent. Okay. And Adnan, do you agree with Stephen and Shazzy on these qualities? What are you looking for normally?
So definitely, I think looking at COVID as well, and even before COVID, I think um, mobility professionals are superheroes. So not all superheroes wear capes, as you know. But I think COVID has truly been the superhero moment for all mobility professionals because it has come to the forefront as to what we can do and how much we actually collaborate. I definitely agree with Stephen's points just there about collaboration. Not only have we sort of collaborated very well with different parts of business like talent or senior executives, but we also collaborated, from our example here, BAE, with risk management professionals, with professionals in safety, health, and environment as well, because it's gone beyond just moving people from here to there. It's about getting people home safely or getting to their assignment location safely as well. And also, it's fostered a deep connection with service providers. It's no longer about, or if it ever was, it's not about you versus them. It's about let's make sure that the service provider delivers and we are one team. As cliched as that sounds, we need to ensure that when a person is moving in this COVID environment, that they're actually getting there safely and without any hassles, any hiccups as well. But I guess coming back to your general point about global mobility professionals, minus the COVID environment, I think the strong skill sets that we have are obviously compliance focused, excellent communicators, open to collaboration, making sure that all the I's and T's are actually ticked off. So, like I said, just in summation to Shazzy and Stephen's points, this crisis has actually elevated the status of mobility professionals. But I think us being in this profession for quite a few years, we've known how much rigor and collaboration we actually put into our work on a daily basis and how much we are part of the HR function. But at the same time, we are probably the function that is very technical and is probably more well connected with some other parts of the business as other parts of the business probably don't realize or didn't realize before this. So yeah.
So it's kind of joining the dots and bringing people together, isn't it? Part of the role. I think when we spoke before, Adnan, too, you said that you feel that being a mobility professional requires a certain level of daring, in that you've got to be able to embrace things that perhaps you're not an expert in, but you've got to tackle them. Is that right?
It definitely is. I mean, some of us may be tax experts, but not all of us are. And it's about speaking the language, being able to communicate those concepts back to your assignees is an important skill set. And then also being open about what if someone doesn't get it, or even you may not get it, you actually then direct them to the professionals, such as your providers, to actually give that explanation, to actually facilitate those conversations as well is an important part of this because it's a very complex area.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Shazzy, I think from our previous conversations, you've told me that despite all the travel restrictions and various other complications at the moment, you've never been busier. Can you
Yeah.
explain why that should be?
There was always talks about, mobility professionals being out of a job, but it
Yes.
seems that it has not happened in the last couple of months, especially. And you would think that things would slow down because there's no travel. But when you look at mobility and the kind of services that we support, it's not just the flight from A to B. There's always shipping, there's always home support, host support, and in between, right?
Mm.
So all that still goes on. And when people are stuck in one country and unable to move, we are then being put in a position where we need to kind of support them to be fair to the
Yeah.
individual. But at the same time, there is the other aspect where companies are now very financial conscious, right? So they are very cost conscious. They want to make sure that we're not overspending. Times are bad and it's not going to be improving anytime soon. So mobility managers would then have to sit in a position where we kind of need to evaluate everything, including the welfare of the employee, the business side of things, as well as your government, maybe customs restrictions, etc. So all these come into play, and we have to be the ones to make the best decision or the recommendation to be put through to the business, because the business will look at us and say, what am I supposed to do? I just need this guy to come here and work, get that sorted. And it's up to us to kind of make it happen, right?
Mm.
And for the employee, it's a very bad experience when things are out of their control, and we are also out of control because it's not within our ability to kind of influence the government, for example.
Yes.
But it's more on managing expectations. And I think one of the most important parts right now is actually managing emotions, the ability to show care and concern. And just being so far away from them, I can't say that, oh no, things will be okay, because even I don't know if it will be okay or not. But it's a sense of assurance to say that even if anything goes wrong, we are here. Our providers are here to support you at any time of the day. So we have been busy also with reviewing the policies and the processes, and I'm not the only one. I'm not speaking on behalf of Dyson, but a lot of companies I've known are taking the opportunity that we don't have so many movements at this time, to relook at everything that we should have in the past, where we always had excuses that no, we don't have time, or especially with stealth employees. Now, in Singapore, for example, Ministry of Manpower requires you to know where your employees are at all times, including holidays, including business trips, assignments. So there is a level of confidentiality and data privacy that is now the new norm. Like, it's okay for you to disclose your current location with the company because there is a government ties to that information. So there's no more stealth employees. There's no more people just going wherever they feel like, because there's so many approvals just getting out of the country now. So I think it's good. It's pushed us, and I think Stephen and Anna would agree. It's pushed us to do things that we should have done in the past. And like what Stephen said, we have a seat at the table, and now mobility has a louder voice, because it not only impacts mobility and HR, but now it can actually impact the entire company and the ability to operate in the company if we go against any government guidelines.
Yes, yes, of course. But presumably also, and this goes back to sort of taking a sort of longer view of things. Although you've got to react in the moment, almost, as you say, you've got to look after people. You've also got to make sure that this isn't going to end up costing the company too much by, because presumably what you do could set a precedent. So everything's got to be scalable, hasn't it?
Yes, everything has to be scalable. And I think the important part is not only just us knowing it internally, there's also a need to cascade the information and the group think to the
Yes.
providers that partner us. So for example, I have to sit down with the partners to say, hey, when you present a business case, this is how it should look like, because now cost is like a big factor for us.
Yes.
Um, and the value or the return on investment. It's no longer signing off 1 million for someone to go for a year, because then we need to see what's the rewards, or how we reap that
Yes.
rewards, or whether it's
Yes.
absolutely necessary for that person to move. Or are we talking about virtual assignments where this person can be in a different location but still performing the host location work?
Mm,
How do we then go about that?
mm,
So I
mm.
think it needs to scale. You can't be approving something 10,000 here, but the intent of the exception is then being used for other cases, and it can cost you 2 million at the end of the year. So it's
Right.
very important to start small, and then build it from there.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you. And Stephen, I'd like to come to you on that, really, about sort of the cost and the scale of assignments. You're looking at this more critically now, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think what COVID-19 has done for us is it's made everything a lot more difficult. And with that, I think there's lots of alternate ways to achieve business goals. And what we've, Shazzy mentioned stealth assignments, and that's definitely something we're looking at as well. So what I think COVID-19 has done is it's raised or highlighted these issues in a much more obvious way now that you've got security and safety looking at the location of where their employees are. So we're actually going through to local HR and saying, actually, do you know where all your local employees are? If not, do you want to maybe think about getting a process in place? Because if they're not in your own country, then there must be somewhere else where there might be immigration, tax, permanent establishment issues to consider. And if you don't work with us in that collaborative way, then we'll just assume that the risk sits with you. So I think stealth expatriates is one of them. Other ways we're looking at it, because cost has become such a critical topic now, we're looking at ways to maybe develop our early career employees with developmental opportunities, and that does involve a relocation. In terms of, I guess, other ways to look at cost management, we are considering reducing the maximum period of an assignment down by a year. An extra sort of, say for example, going from 5 years maximum to 4 years maximum. With that, that does raise a lot of questions around topics like business strategy and succession planning in terms of developing leaders. Is 4 years enough? Do we need more time than that? And also, as Shazzy mentioned, international remote working, that's also something we're looking at as well in terms of the framework. How does that look? Is it about relocating people to jobs that involves immigration and tax? Given it's such a complex environment, should we be looking at it the other way around, where jobs are being relocated to people, but that also then has its own set of challenges, which is around finance, cross-charging, transfer pricing, corporate tax, deductibility, quite a few interesting topics which are outside of my comfort zone.
Yes.
But it's quite an interesting time to be in mobility at the moment. Also, the other one we're looking at is core flex policies. Are we flexible enough? Have we got the duty of care covered in all assignment situations?
Okay, thank you. Well, you've ticked off at least 3 of those 4 criteria that we talked about earlier. So we talked about innovation, strategy, impact. We just need the results now. So in a year's time, I hope we'll check in with you and find out some more about the core flex, or what you've decided to do and how it's worked out. But anyway, thank you. Yes, no, that's really good. Thank you. So Adnan, I mean, do you think there's been more? Well, there has obviously been more pressure on in-house teams with this situation, and is it more difficult for you to balance the needs of the business with looking after the assignees, and how does that translate in terms of the innovation strategy and so on?
Yeah, I come back to Shazzy's point earlier. I think the last 6 months have been incredibly busy for us. Especially since in our business being a defence contractor to the Australian government and to the UK government as well, we have some sovereign projects that we need to deliver, which is largely involving shipbuilding at the moment in Australia. And we can't, whilst we can do some of our work, some of these individuals can work in their home locations, they have to actually be on the ground, and they have to come here, or they have to go to the UK for certain parts of that project that needs to be absolutely be done on the ground. So we've had to deal with things like travel bans, immigration changes, especially not so much from Australia to the UK, perhaps more from the UK to Australia, because Australia has had so many changes. Almost on a weekly basis, we have changes in entry regulations concerning interstate movements. We've had changes to immigration, the number of caps of how many people can actually enter Australia on any given day. So we've had to be very flexible. We had to be very collaborative with our service providers, but also we had to manage expectations with the senior managers and executives that we are doing everything that we possibly can, but we just need to wait for the immigration department to give us a travel ban exemption, as an example. And that can be quite frustrating for us, because we are putting in our best efforts, but and sometimes we sort of dealing with situations where we feel like there's a black hole on the other end because we just don't get the information. And I have to say our service providers have been exceptional, whether that be in the in the moving space or in the immigration space, because they've helped us navigate through this really complex and challenging time. So it has, coming back to the question, has tested our relationship with them, but I think we've come out really strongly on the other end. I mean, I'm not pretending that this is the end of the crisis, but I think our relationship has become much stronger. And I think, as you know, with any difficult situation, that's where a relationship gets tested. And I think it's proven to us that we can certainly deliver as one team, regardless of whether we're working as part of an internal team or an external team as well.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Actually, you brought us on nicely to the second part of our discussion, really, the looking at service providers. So let me come to you, Stephen. Schneider's all about digitization, isn't it? What does that mean for you in terms of what you're looking for?
Definitely. So Schneider Electric is obviously in the energy business, and we're looking at industrial automation and energy consulting. So one of our strategies is around digitization, and this means that I think with COVID-19 and the fact that we're all working remotely and we're relying on technology to deliver our work as well, digitization with our service providers is a key element when it comes to the RFPs. So what we're looking at is, we've invested in technology with Topia, and with that, we expect all of our providers to have APIs that connect in, and they also need to make sure that there's ways to work around working with digital formats. And I think having that culture in Schneider Electric means that we expect our service providers to have that same culture as well. And with that, I think digitization brings a new frontier where things can be done more quickly. They're scalable, as mentioned before. Scalability is quite important for mobility. Then it's also, we do expect there to be an increase in agility as well. So I think COVID-19 has been a really interesting time where this has all been put to the test. And what we want to do then is have the team work working towards more of the business strategy, making sure that diversity and inclusion is a strong part of our strategy. So we also want to be able to hold up the mirror to a lot of our business decision makers and say, hey, have you got diversity amongst your assignees? With also the service providers, we are also looking for more efficiency and cost containment. Yet we do want to retain the high touch approach with our senior executives as well. So it's changing, and I think the bar's getting it's rising higher. Let's put it that way.
Yes, it's a fine balance, isn't it? I mean, it's a difficult line to tread, really. I think for a lot of service providers. Obviously, at the moment, it's been a tough time for all kinds of businesses, but I think particularly for some providers, and some have definitely risen to the challenge wonderfully, I think. Shazzy, come back to you. What are you looking for, do you think? And let's bear in mind innovation strategy, results and impact.
Yeah, I think for next year, it will be how the relocation providers think out of the box and to provide solutions that are very quick and nimble, because in the past we used to be able to follow our SOPs. There's always time to think through things and come up with a beautiful plan. That's not the case now. They need to think about how are you helping and being impactful to your clients and yet remaining cost conscious. And it's got to be creative, I think. There is no set ways now. So however you can help your client transition through this tough pandemic, I think that would be very helpful. There I've known of companies who have thought of ways that are very, very creative and to adapt to the situation, and yet they forgot about the whole thing about money. It's so expensive to implement that. So I think that there needs to be a good balance, and good examples clearly depicting or showing how that has helped short term and long term. results.
Yes.
I think that's very, very important as well. So that's something that I would be very curious to look at, because at the end of the day, it's how you kind of have that relationship with your client. Not all clients would like that solution, but what makes the most impact for that client? I think that would be helpful.
Yes, sure. I think Adnan, you mentioned before that this situation's really sort of, well, it's tested some relationships, but strengthened others, because it's reinforced the need for complete trust. And after all, your providers are representing you as the ultimately you're the client, but to the assignees and your employees. If when you're working with a provider partner, they are representing BAE systems, presumably too. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree. And at times, I think at the start, if I cast my mind back to the start of the crisis, I have to say some of our assignees are a little bit frustrated with some of our providers, and we had to actually go back and reiterate to them that there's really no playbook to this crisis. We've had to actually innovate and obviously engineer the solutions as we went along. So to be fair to a lot of the providers, they've had to learn very quickly, and they've
As
had
we
to
all have.
really, yeah, as we all have through this crisis. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. It's important that they represent your brand and that they
Yeah.
are obviously kept honest at the same time. But at the
Yes.
same time, you also have to realize at some points that you need to support them through certain situations like COVID, because COVID, like I said, was a unique, very dynamic situation, and no government and no organization has had a, silver bullet to this crisis as of yet. So that's been our experience, and obviously we've taken into account situations where, some service offerings have not, sort of went along as we wanted to, and I think that's just a given in our sort of everyday mobility sort of landscape
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
Claire, if I may add one thing, I think what's important is that the relocation providers not only focus on customer service for the employees and the experience, the people experience for the employees that they're dealing with, but it's also the mobility managers that you have to remember to make our lives easier, um, and try to give us whatever information that we can to make business decisions so that it would help then the employees that they're dealing with. So I think that's a key takeaway. I think that there are two parties that are usually interacting with the provider, and it has to be a solution has to fit both parties.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. And
I can see
speed of
Adnan
communication.
and Stephen
Yes.
agreeing to make life
Yes.
easier for us.
That's right, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think, and also from my perspective, it's the context. So over the last 6 months, the context has changed when it comes to the discussion around mobility. And what I find is the providers that actually match the culture of the organization, the client organization, they tend to be more successful because there's a lot of empathy. And I think when times are tough, when it comes to immigration topics or a shipment or just not being able to relocate successfully with family, I think having that culture and background and just the way things are done, and responding in a mirrored manner, I think that really does help. And I think
Yes.
COVID-19 has just been really eye-opening in terms of those relationships being cemented.
Yes. Yes. That's a really good point. Thank you. That sort of brings us on to the final part of our discussion, where we're just talking really about the entries for next year, hopefully, and actually the key importance of communication. So you've just been talking about how service providers communicate with you. I think, Shazi, when we spoke previously, you said that you knew of some who were sending WhatsApp messages, because
Yeah.
waiting several days for a quote on something via email is just not viable anymore. So it's about being flexible. But if we're talking about entries and so on, it seems to me that one of the things we need to do for next year is introduce a category in crisis management, because I think we'll have some very interesting responses to that. But let's just talk about being a judge, what you're looking for, and also what it means to be a winner. Adnan, I think you can appreciate that it can be a bit daunting to put an entry together, but it can also be a very useful way of reflecting on your achievements and perhaps looking at what you might have done better, and as I say, putting a kind of different perspective on things. As a judge as well, do you think that you learn something from the process of looking at the entries too?
Yeah, I think it's important when you look at entries that I think the storytelling is really important, because how you've sort of dealt with the project or a situation or a collaborative effort that you've managed. It's about bringing, if I was a judge, it's about taking me along that journey. So what differentiates, I guess, a winning entry from a non-winning entry is the person being able to articulate the challenges that they've faced, the collaborative efforts that they put in, how they've sort of pivoted themselves to kind of deal with the different setbacks that they've had in the process. And everyone does have setbacks. So I think when someone paints a picture of a project that has gone very, very smoothly, then I can't believe that, because as a HR professional, you have a lot of bumps along the way. You gotta that's there ain't a project that has been delivered smoothly in HR. So I think it also, like you said, it also gives me the chance to reflect upon and think about all the different projects and challenges that I've faced. And when I read about those stories, I can see my own sort of experience in some of those examples, and it helps me also appreciate some of the projects that I have done and where I haven't probably put my name forward, and I haven't really thought about them being such amazing efforts or accomplishments as well. So I think it's a two-way process. It's about, obviously appreciating the journey, but also self-reflection as well. And I really enjoy doing that. So thank you very much for giving me that opportunity in the past.
No, thank you. I think what you've said there is really, really important too. That actually, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but we only learn from mistakes. We learn from them. So it's much better to be honest in an entry, and kind of, as you say, chart the whole journey, because it comes across as much more real. I know, I always feel very privileged because I read all the entries, 250, 300 of them every time for each region, and I read them several times, which is probably why my eyes are so bad. But I find it fascinating to see how people communicate as much as anything. And I think for me, sometimes I feel slightly frustrated because I might have had a conversation with someone who's told me previously about the work they've been doing, and then the entry arrives and it doesn't convey that in the same way. And I know that's that may be the difference between them winning or not, and it's really hard. So it's about sort of thinking clearly about how you set it out, making your achievements stand out, but also qualify them and give an honest account, I think. Sorry. So, Stephen, what do you get out of judging? I'm going to come to you last in a minute again about being a winner, but what do you get out of judging? Because I think you said before that it's quite good to be nosy. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Thanks for that, Claire. In terms of being a judge, first of all, it's an industry I'm passionate about. I really like the people in the other organisations, and when we do come to FEM, it's like seeing your old friends, and there's so much to catch up on. I can imagine the next FEM is going to be buzzing because we're hopefully going to come off the back of COVID-19. But for me, it's just providing, I guess, my input into the industry, but it's also, as a judge, you get to see what other organisations are doing. And for example, if I'm a judge on a certain category and there's 10 nominations, then obviously you get to see within that category what's going on and who's doing what. So for me, it's a great window into that into that area, and then. I just wanted to sort of, I guess, feel like, there is something going on, and I'm benchmarking myself against that as well. So,
yes. Well, actually, Schneider in Europe won several awards, didn't they, in EMEA last year? So, is there a sort of rivalry between your departments? Are you going to be entering as APAC next year? I mean.
Definitely, definitely. For us, APAC is our largest business, so therefore we do have quality initiatives out in APAC in its own merits as well. So I think there's a lot of things happening here where we will be nominating for ourselves. Definitely don't want to be outdone.
No. I'll just emphasise you will not be judging your own entries. So nobody on this panel
definitely
will be
not.
No.
Conflict of interest.
Yes, certainly. Shazzy, can I come to you? What makes an entry really stand out for you? I mean, is the way that the information is presented and so on, is that important to you, or is it the quality of the examples, the testimonials? Is there anything that you'd advise against doing, for instance?
I would advise on for the providers or the entry to actually be to showcase that you're hungry to be recognized or hungry to win, because I think many of us can agree we've seen entries that are like, it didn't look like there was very much effort put into the entry. And if you really want to be out there winning an Oscar, for example, you're going to give your best Oscar performance, right? So that's what you're supposed to be doing on that pen and paper. We don't know you personally. We can only read what we see on the paper, and that's the experience that we're going to be basing our opinions on. So it'll be best to include everything and be very systematic in the approach. So if there's a problem, what was the solution? How do you rectify it going forward, etc. So it has to be thought through properly, and those that have won so far, I think, not just articulated, but there was always a sense of accomplishment and recognition at the end for themselves. It wasn't just externally being recognized, but they felt like, oh, I really made a change in someone's life or in the company. And that actually shows very well in the way that they wrote for the nomination. So I think that would stand out.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I think that's really good advice. So, Stephen, I'm just going to ask you about your, how it all boosted your profile at Schneider and all that stuff. So, if you can tell us about that article and so on. But let me pose the question to you properly. Okay. So Stephen, you were last year's recipient of the Emma in APAC for your outstanding contribution to global mobility, and I'd like to emphasize, that wasn't just about what you've achieved in your career within the corporations that you've worked at, but also it's about the way that you have communicated with the global mobility community and, acted as a sort of mentor and, been very generous with your knowledge. What difference did it make to you in terms of your profile, perhaps within your company or beyond, if at all? So, tell us what did it mean to you to win, and did it make a difference to your career, do you think?
Definitely. First of all, thank you for the award. It's been 1 year, and I think I was pleasantly surprised last year in Singapore. And I do have that trophy at my desk here in Hong Kong. And anyone who walks past, if they glimpse at it, I talk about it a lot. So it's been a wonderful contribution towards my table. In terms of Schneider, the employer branding people who work quite closely with us in mobility and HR generally, they picked up on that, and they ran a video which got put onto the TVs in Singapore, and I think we've got something like 2,000 employees in Singapore, and it goes on in the lift, and I get random people stopping me and going, "Oh, are you Stephen Parker, the one who was in the video?" It's like, congratulations. So it's been quite interesting, and even though 1 year later, I think it's still running in the videos. So it's been wonderful. In terms of, I guess, the recognition that has come out of that, the IMC has been, the International Mobility Centre, we've been going through a journey of trying to, I guess, get more, more seat at the table. And having accolades like this does give us a little bit more gravitas. And I think the team are also really proud of the fact that I won the award, and they do make a talking point with other HR colleagues and also the expatriates themselves. So it's been wonderful.
I can vouch for Stephen being very, very shocked that he won, because I had to hold his champagne glass while he ran up on stage, because he was totally off guard when it was called Stephen Park, and he was like, "What, me?" So I vouch for that. You're
Oh,
welcome.
yes.
Yes, next year.
Yes, well, you have to crown the next winner, Stephen. So for 2021. So, but yeah, no, it was a great experience, and as I say, I certainly get an awful lot out of reading all the entries, and I love the being able to present the award for the outstanding. That's the only one that FEM actually choose. The rest of it is all done by you judges, but it's a great privilege, and I'm really looking forward to some entries. Well, lots of entries, I hope, next year, and I do hope that we can get back to some form of normality very soon. We're looking forward to coming back to Singapore next September, and of course we'll be in all sorts of locations before then. So we'll see everyone in 2021. Thank you so much again for taking part, all of you. That's been a really interesting discussion, and I hope we'll keep in touch in the meantime, and take care. Thank you. Thank you. So we've come to the end of this year's second online summit. I hope you found it useful and interesting, and I think actually, despite all the challenges, we've also heard a great deal to make us feel very positive about the future. Of course, we all really miss being able to meet up at the moment, but I hope that this has in some way helped to make you feel more connected. Do send us your comments, and please also do fill in the quick survey that we'll send out following this event. Your feedback really is very useful to us. I want to thank all our marvellous speakers again, and our sponsors, Air Inc., Alto Vita, HSBC and Removal Management Worldwide. They've all been so professional and delightful to work with. Thank you too for tuning in and for sending in your questions. I hope that you'll join us for our EMEA Online Summit, which will begin on Monday, the 16th of November. This time we're going to do things a little differently, and so we're going to have an hour or so of presentations and live discussions each day. It's going to be spread out across the week, fit in with your busy work schedule, and hopefully enable some more active participation. This time we'll do things a little differently, and we'll offer you an hour or so of presentations and live discussions spread out across the week. I hope this will fit in with your busy work schedule and enable some more active participation. Then, as for 2021, we are very excited to announce that, all being well, we will see everyone again in Amsterdam in March, New York in June, Sydney in July, Singapore in September, and London in November. We've secured some really exciting new venues, and we can't wait to welcome you back. But please be assured that we'll be working hard to organise and manage all our events with your safety and productivity as our top priority. So thank you very much again. See you soon. And in the meantime, stay safe.